On November 30th, 2021, Josephine Baker was honored by being inducted into the Pantheon in Paris, joining some of the most revered luminaries in French history from politics, culture, and science. The petition for induction noted that she was an artist, the first Black international star, a muse of the Cubists, a resistance fighter during the Second World War in the French Army, and active alongside Martin Luther King in the civil rights fight. She is the first Black woman to be honored with induction into the Pantheon. At her family's request, her final resting place will remain at the Monaco Cemetery with other family members. A symbolic coffin or cenotaph containing soil from Missouri, France, and Monaco, places she lived, was installed into Crypt 13 at the Pantheon. The Pantheon interment ceremony included a speech by French President Emanuel Macron, which highlighted her life story, contributions, and accomplishments. An English translation was also provided, and this video uses the exact wording of that translation, adding photos and videos to help illustrate the story. So this is essentially a presentation of Macron's speech that evening.
Héroïne de guerre,
War hero,
combattante,
fighter,
danseuse,
dancer,
chanteuse,
singer.
noire défendant les
A
noirs.
Black woman defending Black people, but first and foremost, a woman defending the human race, both American and French. Josephine Baker led countless fights with a sense of freedom, levity, cheerfulness. Strikingly beautiful and perceptive in a century of misguidance, she made the right choices at every turn of history, choosing light and enlightenment over darkness. And yet, her life was nothing but one that was predetermined.
1906.
St. Louis, 1906. Born to a washerwoman mother and an unknown father, she lived in a shack with a leaky roof. At only 8 years old, she served a rich white home to feed her own poor Black family. She was beaten, abused, and so she ran away. She was a powerless witness to race riots and the numerous dead. She married at 13 and never gave in to fate. Dancing. She danced to live and lived to dance. In St. Louis, New Orleans, Philadelphia, she captivated audiences with her energy and her humor. She then left for Broadway, a theater of endless possibilities, where she met Caroline Dudley, producer of musical reviews throughout Europe, where the curtains rose. She opened the doors, she broke down barriers.
Paris.
Paris, 1925. When Josephine Baker arrived in France, Paris was a movable feast, and she was just shy of 20. The roaring 20s were years of dance and music, of raucous nightlife in which a young Joseph Kessel had no idea that one day he would write the Chant des Partisans. France was torn between a thirst for freedom and colonial prejudice, but the kid from St. Louis stood out. She stood out from her many fellow countrymen, because on that famous evening of October 2nd, 1925, at the Théâtre des Champs-Élysées, she gave a performance that transcended France's internally conflicting nature of the time. The directors of the Revue Nègre created for her a kind of belly dance, born perhaps of some form of wild exotic fantasy, and she performed it, but with puffed cheeks and knocked knees. She turned the sensual into something comical. When she was asked to dance naked, wearing just a dress of bananas, she agreed, but she did it her way, using funny faces and jokey gestures, sweeping away clichés with a simple hoop movement, and rolling her mocking eyes at Negro imagery. Josephine Baker played into hysteria. She shook them up. She scratched away at them. She turned them into a form of sublime burlesque. It was the spirit of the Enlightenment period that was used to ridicule colonialist prejudice, all set to music by Sidney Bechet, and it was an instant success.
Folie Bergère.
At the Folies Bergère, on the legendary stairs of the Casino de Paris, and on stages throughout capitals of Europe, the mesmerizing dances of the Black Pearl stood as a defined counterpoint to the continuous baseline of racism, and took France, in fact all of Europe, by storm. She would go on to sing popular songs by Vincent Scotto. She would be an actor on the silver screen alongside Jean Gabon. She would later then speed down the Champs-Élysées with a cheetah on a leash, in a convertible with snakeskin upholstery, spending one night with a man, the next in the arms of a woman. She had two loves in life. In just a few short years, Josephine Baker became a legend. She embraced the stage, became one with her own sense of freedom, and became part of the hearts and minds of all French people. Always carefree but never careless, she was born by cheerful courage. She had a sense of lightness that was dampened by a sense of sadness of those who had lived. She was a persecuted American seeking refuge in Paris. She epitomized the French spirit and became the symbol of an era.
Crèvecoeur-le-Grand.
In Crèvecoeur-le-Grand, in the Loise region, November 30th, 1937, some 84 years ago to the day, Josephine had just returned from a rather challenging tour of the United States, where segregation was worse than ever. She married Jean Lyon and thus became a French citizen. The French have given me everything. I'm ready to give over to them my life. Josephine Baker never saw her new nationality as a right, but above all as a duty, a daily challenge to be overcome. She dedicated herself entirely to her new country and to its values. She became an activist of the International League Against Anti-Semitism in as early as 1938. She then became an Air Force officer, serving as a nurse in operations conducted by the Red Cross. On the Maginot Line, she gave memorable concerts to boost morale among the troops. As the Nazi blitzkrieg shook Europe to its core, Josephine Baker decided to do more. She traded in the limelight for the flames of the resistance. And even before the 18th of June, she became an honorable correspondent. She served her new country, putting her own life on the line, protecting resistance fighters and Jews alike on her property at Les Milandes. She turned it into a radio antenna hub. Even from her hospital bed in Casablanca, where she met all resistance French officers stationed in the Maghreb, she traveled throughout Africa and Europe, passing on confidential information. Written on her music scores in invisible ink and concealed in her dresses, she crossed the desert in a jeep to galvanize soldiers preparing to land in Provence. Josephine played such a decisive role that she was awarded the Resistance Medal. But above all, the insignia she preferred was a small gold cross, the Croix de Lorraine, that she received from General de Gaulle himself. She would go on later to sell the cross in order to fund her own foundation to benefit resistance fighters. She also won the Croix de Guerre with Palme Fronde and a Légion d'honneur given to her by General Vallon. That is Josephine, one who fought for France's freedom, without ulterior motives, without seeking greater glory, one devoted to our ideals.
Washington.
Washington, 28th of August, 1963. As a much-adored icon of the liberation, she could have, like many others, settled into a life of fame and fortune. But Josephine Baker, wearing her Air Force uniform with pride, stood before thousands of civil rights activists and spoke. She spoke before the speech given by Martin Luther King. On that day, a day that she would call the best day of her life, it was one that marked the culmination of a long crusade. As she walked up to the lectern, no doubt she thought back to the little girl who was punished by her white masters for breaking a plate, punished by having her hands scalded with boiling water. No doubt she thought back to the time when, As a celebrity, she was denied access to hotels in the United States. No doubt she thought back to that evening when, under the gaze of Grace Kelly, who would never forget the evening, she was refused service at the Stork Club, a major New York restaurant. No doubt she thought back to the Harlem community that in 1951 organized a Baker Day to thank her for having allowed all people, both black and white, thousands of men and women, to join her fights to attend her concerts. And in referring in her speech to her forthcoming invitation to the White House, Josephine Baker surely remembered all that and more. And so she said to the crowd, "It is not a colored woman, a black woman who will attend. It is a woman." Josephine Baker did not defend a particular color of skin. She carried an ideal of humankind, and she fought for the freedoms of each and every person. Her cause was that of universalism, the unity of the human race. Universal equality before individual identity, emancipation against discrimination. She fought for dignity. She fought for everyone. In this respect, as she stood at the Lincoln Memorial with her Medal of Resistance pinned to her lapel, she was more French than ever. She was ever fair, ever fraternal. She was ever French. I'd let no one today distort the universal nature of her cause, because being black for her didn't take precedence over being American or French. She was not fighting in the name of a black cause. No, she was fighting to be a free citizen, one living in dignity, one who is completely and resolutely free.
Dans mon village, j'élève tendrement. Dans mon village, 5 tout petits enfants, 5 orphelins d'ici de là, qui s'ennuyaient seuls ici-bas. Et j'ai voulu qu'ils soient choyés dans un foyer.
Dordogne, 15 mars.
Dordogne, 15th of March, 1969. In spite of the many tours, in spite of Brigitte Bardot's courage and televised appeals, in spite of the support of generous donors, Josephine Baker was evicted from her world-famous property in Périgord, the Château des Milandes. And away from the glamour and glitter, she fled with her children to Paris and then on to Monaco. And it was in Monaco that Princess Grace took her in, as protector and friend, offering her asylum and generously accommodating her and her entire family. On that day in March 1969, she not only bade farewell to her roots, to her castle on the moon that she much loved and had lived in for more than 30 years, she bade farewell also to a wild dream, that of setting up a school of universal brotherhood in Les Milandes, a place where she wanted to teach children from around the world, to teach them tolerance, secularism, equality, and fraternity. And while the school never came to be, she and Joe Bouillon adopted 12 children. Aikio and Teruya from Japan, Louis from Colombia, Jerry from Finland, Jean-Claude, Moïse, and Noël from France, Brian and Marianne from Algeria, Kofi from Ivory Coast, Tara from Venezuela, and Stelino from Morocco. These 12 children, this family, it was through them that Josephine Baker could prove to the world that people of different skin color, origin, or religion could not only live together, but do so in harmony. You are here tonight just as she had dreamt. Her rainbow tribe, as she called it, is the most beautiful of humanist manifestos. It is a vision of the universalism of which she so deeply believed. Josephine parted with life at the same time that she left the stage, just a few hours after her second performance of a show dedicated to her life. It was at the Bobino Theatre, in the heart of the Paris Gaieté district. Gaieté, which means joy, a name that suited her so well. And just a few days later, on April 15, 1975, thousands of Parisians took to the Rue Royale to escort her coffin, which was then already draped in blue, white, and red as it headed towards the Madeleine Church, where France buries its artists. And today here we are again, the same blue, white, and red as she enters our Pantheon. So Josephine Baker enters here together with all the artists, all those artists who loved jazz, dance, music, cubism, freedom of those early years. She enters here with all those who, like her, saw in France a land to live in, a place where one need not crave for someplace else, where emancipation is not a vague promise. She enters here with all those who chose France, who loved France so deeply, who saw France stumble but continued to love it, who saw France brought to its knees but fought to bring France up onto its own 2 feet again. They are French, by the blood they shed, the battles they fought, and the love they gave. She enters here as a reminder to us all, who so stubbornly try to forget the indescribable beauty of our shared destiny. Our nation is one of a fraternal fight that we so deeply desire and we deserve, a nation that is great when it is fearless. Josephine Baker, you enter our Pantheon and you are joined by the whims of fancy and of daringness, because it is one particular idea of liberty and celebration that enters with you. You enter our Pantheon because you loved France, because you showed France a true path that was doubted by so many. You enter our Pantheon because, while you were born American, deep down there was no one more French than you. And while, as your career came to an end, when you adapted the lyrics of one of your greatest hits, you proclaimed, "My country is Paris." Each of us tonight, we hum that line of that song as an ode to love. My France
C'est Joséphine.
is Josephine.